Hello, my name is Robert Kiyosaki, and I'm best known for a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I published in 1997. And it has been on the New York Times bestseller list and bestseller list all over the world for, I think, nearly 7 years, which is, if I may say so myself, quite an accomplishment. My other book, the latest book that just came out in 2008, is How to Increase Your Financial IQ. And in these economic, volatile times, I really think increasing this, your number one asset, your IQ, is especially important today. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is something I call the new rules of money. And before I go into the new rules, I'll just explain why they're new rules. The rules of money changed first in 1971 when President Nixon took us off the gold standard, and second in 1974 when ERISA was passed. And ERISA now is known as a 401k. The reason ERISA is so important, or 1974 is so important, it meant to all employees that you no longer had a paycheck for life. The company was not going to take care of you for the rest of your life. So 1974 meant you had to now sort of save and invest enough money so that you could afford to pay yourself a paycheck for the rest of your life. So that's why after 1971 and 1974, the rules of money changed. So before I go into the new rules, I'd like to go into the old rules. Prior to 1971, the old rules were go to school, get a safe, secure job. The second was work hard to earn more money. 3, save money. 4, buy a house. 5, get out of debt. 6, invest for the long term. And in most people's cases, they invest in mutual funds. And 7, diversify. So those are the old rules, and when I talk to even young people today, people under 20 years old, they still say the same thing. I'm going to school to get a safe, secure job. I'm going to work hard to make a lot of money. I'm going to save money. I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to get out of debt. I'm going to invest for the long term in mutual funds, and I'm going to diversify. Those are the old rules. What I'm going to go into today are the new rules, and again, the new rules came in after 1971 and 74. So let me talk about the new rules. Let's take this word here, school. Before 1971 and 1974, you could just go to school and get a job and all those types of things. But today, after 1971 and 74, people need to know you need more education than the school systems provide. For example, one type of education our schools provide for is a thing called academic. And I don't spell very well, so if I misspelled something, let me know. But academic means reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's very important. Rule number 2 you have to learn in school is professional. So, after I graduate from high school or college or whatever it is, do I go on to law school or to go to trade school, become a plumber, or to learn to be a webmaster, whatever it is? So it's academic and professional education. This is also very important. Our schools do a pretty good job of that. The third type of education that's important after 1971 and 74, the third is financial education. And this is why people are in financial trouble today. Because our school systems have very little, if any, financial education. And the only kind of financial education many school teachers are teaching kids is stuff they know, which is get a safe, secure job, work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest in a house, and invest in mutual funds. That is inadequate financial education today. And the Rich Dad Company is an educational company that provides financial education appropriate to these times. So that's the first set of new rules. The new rule is after 1971 and 74, we all need more financial education and invest in our greatest asset, our minds, or increasing our financial IQ. So the advantage I had in my life was my poor dad was an academic guy. He was a PhD, head of education. He's a great, great guy. I love him dearly. But as you know, since we don't teach much about financial education, people are in financial trouble today. And that's where my rich dad kicked in. My rich dad thought this was very important, and my poor dad thought this was very important. So that's the difference between rich dad and poor dad. And one more thing, the reason I apologize for my spelling is even though my dad was the head of education for the state of Hawaii, he had me as his son, which kept him humble. And I flunked out of high school twice because I could not spell. You know, so I'm not very good at academically. In fact, I'm not good to all of this stuff, but it's a combination of these three types of education that are essential today in this new economy, this new set of rules in the world. So the second rule that's changed is these two words here, job and work. And again, it goes back to the rule changes in 71 and 74. One of the first things that changed is that this comes from my book, the second book in the Rich Dad series, is the cash flow quadrant. And my Rich Dad said there's four basic people in the world of business. They're employees, self-employed or small business or specialists like a doctor or attorney. There's big business, and there's an investor. So what happens is the reason people get in financial trouble, since they don't have any financial education, well, they do get a job, and they either get a job as an employee or they get a job as a specialist, you know, like a doctor, a lawyer, small business person, and all this. So this is what our school systems currently train people to be, and that's why you hear people say, I'm going to go to school so I can get a safe, secure job. And most of the time, they're over here, and that was my poor dad. He wanted me to get a job here. My mother wanted me to become a doctor, you know, a smart person. And I said, Mom, there's only one problem with me being a doctor is I'm not smart. She says, good point there. You probably shouldn't be a doctor, and things like this. Now, the other thing that most people do not know is the tax laws for all four of these people are different. The employees pay the highest percentage of taxes. Second are the specialists, like the doctors, lawyers, accountants. And these guys pay the least and sometimes zero taxes. So that's what's changing, is because we need to know, as part of our financial education, is how does tax affect our lives? And taxes are single largest expense, and given the national debt of most countries and the U.S., they're going to keep raising taxes somehow, sales tax, gas tax, whatever the case is. The Rich Dad Company trains people to work over here, to either become an entrepreneur like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Branson or Rupert Murdoch, you know, some big entrepreneur, my friend Donald Trump, or to be an investor like Warren Buffett or George Soros, things like this. So the Rich Dad Company trains people to work or to think like B's and I's. The trouble with most E's, the reason they don't make it well over here, is they're so into security. You know, I need job security. And these guys here, the specialists, they say, if you want it done right, you do it by yourself. So they get taxed the most and all this. Another point here is the reason the governments of the world give these guys the tax breaks is because these guys provide the jobs, and these guys provide the investment money to build new houses and factories and things like this. So that's why these guys get the tax breaks here. So another reason people are in financial trouble is after 1974, all of these guys had to start becoming investors. And that's why in 1974 in America it's called the 401k. And the problem with that is the most highly taxed investment vehicle you can put your money into. So because of a lack of financial education, people are investing in 401ks and mutual funds and still paying exceptionally high taxes. Another part of your financial IQ is to know there's three types of income. So if you're going to say work hard, most people are working hard for earned income, and that's what these guys are working for. The trouble with earned income in America, your tax rate's approximately 50%, whereas Warren Buffett says it's a shame that his secretary pays a higher percentage in taxes than he did, although he makes billions of dollars. So when you say to a child, go to school and get a safe, secure job, you tell them to work for earned income, the worst type of income. The second type of income is portfolio income. And today, as I speak, and they're trying to change this, it's about 20%. And portfolio income is generally known as capital gains. So if I buy a stock for $10 and I sell it for $50, the $40 gain is taxed at 20%. Or if I buy a house for $100,000 and I sell it for $200,000, that's a capital gains type event. So you pay a lot of tax for that. And the third type of income, which is the best type of income, excuse me, I can't spell again, is passive income. And this is income that just comes in on a regular basis. One of the reasons I am wealthy and is able to retire at a young age is because I worked hard for passive income, not earned income. I don't flip real estate generally, not portfolio income. I don't flip stocks. I want passive income. So today, the new rules of money is important to understand what are you going to school to become, ES, entrepreneur or investor, and what kind of income you're working hard for, earned, portfolio, or passive. And if you know what you're doing, you can pay 0% taxes legally. And this can be done all over the world. People say, we can't do it in my country. Well, these people can't do it in any country, but in most parts of the world, governments need these people. So they're always giving tax incentives for investors and business owners who are for passive income. So those are some of the new rules of money. You've really got to know what you're working hard at and what kind of work are you performing, what kind of income are you working hard for. Personally, I want to minimize this. Unfortunately, one more point, is 401k when you retire is earned income. From savings, it's earned income. So that's why I don't personally have a 401k and I don't have savings, and I really don't want a job, is because I don't want much earned income. What I'm working hard for is portfolio and passive income, and that's required for people to think like B's and I's. And that's what my book, The Cash Flow Quadrant, is about. For those who want to make changes from E's and S's to B's and I's, I think it's a book you'll find worth reading. You might find it's a mindset change first. Like, these guys want job security. These guys want to take advantage of opportunities. These guys want to do it on their own, so they don't make very good big entrepreneurs. So those are some of the difference. It begins with mindset and all this, and knowing what kind of income you work hard for. So the third new rule of money is, I think the big mistake is, I hear so many people say it's important to save. That's ridiculous. And the reason that's ridiculous is because what happened in 1971 is crucial. In 1971, the U.S. dollar stopped being money. In 1971, the U.S. dollar became a currency. And what that meant is Richard Nixon, in 1971, the president, took us off the gold standard. That's like giving an alcoholic free rein to the bar, or it's like giving somebody who can't control their spending unlimited credit cards. So what's happening is all the savers today are losers. You know, the problem with 1971 is that the federal government keeps printing money, so the value of your money keeps going down. So these people, I'm saving, 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 and if you notice, as the value of the dollar goes down, prices go up. So they call this inflation. You know, you look at in 1997, oil was about, I think, $10 a barrel. 10 years later, it's about $135 a barrel. So they say it's inflation, but really what it is the dollar's value coming down. So savers are getting wiped out today. So to keep saying to yourself and to your kids to save money, that is not the new rule. That's an old rule. So a very big problem for most people is stop using the word save and use the word hedge. You've got to hedge your money, hedge against losses. Like when I buy a stock, I put a hedge in. I put a stop loss or a put inside of it or a call, whatever I'm doing. I want to stop it. So today, I don't save money. I'm hedging. So in 1997, I started investing in oil, gold, and silver. So as the dollar dropped, oil, gold, and silver went up. So I'm not betting so much on oil, gold, and silver. I'm betting against the U.S. dollar. And that's why this idea that you're going to tell people you need to save money, that's really, really an obsolete idea, because the idea went obsolete in 1971. The U.S. dollar in the last few years has lost almost 80% of its purchasing power. And the prediction is, because this has happened throughout history, it happened thousands of years ago with the Romans, with the Greeks, with the Germans, with the English, the Japanese, and the Chinese. Every time they've made money into a currency, something you could print at unlimited, every time that has happened, the currency has gone to its true value, which is zero. So I am afraid as this economic volatility continues, the savers who were operating by the old rules of money are just going to get wiped out because the purchasing power of their dollar is going to go down. So even if the bank's paying you 5 to 10% interest, you can't keep up with the banks printing money. So that's the old rule of money, is saving money, and the new rule is hedge. You've got to be able to see what's coming up as something else is coming down. The last thing I want to point out to you on this idea of saving money is this. One of the biggest misunderstandings in the world today is what they talk about if I misspell again, apologize, is the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, which I believe was created in 1913. In 1971, the reason 1971 is such an important time was because the U.S. Federal Reserve became the bank to the world. They could print as much money as they wanted. Never in the history of the world has anybody been allowed to print money for the rest of the world. Let me backtrack one more time. I talked about how the Romans did it, the Greeks did it, and all this. Every time people have done this, chaos has broken out, and that's why there's chaos in the world today. So in 1913, when the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank was created, they were basically allowed to print money for the world. Every time that has happened throughout history, a despot has arrived. For example, in 1933, a man named Adolf Hitler rose to power when the Weimar Republic was allowed to print as much money as it wanted to do. And in Russia, when Russia's currency broke down, a man named Lenin rose. When the Chinese economy broke down, Mao Zedong rose. When the Yugoslavian government broke down, Milosevic arose. So we're in that critical point right now, and one of the causes of it was in 1933, this thing called the U.S. Federal Reserve was created. And I think, they've done a pretty good job of making the rich richer. Unfortunately, the poor, many of the poor are getting poor. One of the problems of this is you have to understand that, first of all, the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank is not U.S. It is made up of a bunch of international rich guys from all over the world. The second thing, it is not federal. It's not a U.S. entity. It is, again, a bunch of rich banks from all over the world. Third, it has no reserves. There is nothing there. And fourth, it's not a bank. So that's why when I talk to people about really needing to understand the new rules of money, which really began to take effect in 1971 when we were allowed to print money for the rest of the world, is understanding that this system here is causing the rich to get richer and the poor and middle class to get poorer, but most importantly, the lower middle class is almost getting wiped out. High prices, volatilities in the market, food getting more expensive, gas getting more expensive, savings getting wiped out, home values going around. And the reason the troubles have started, again, is the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank is not U.S., it's not federal, there's no reserve, it's not a bank. So if you understand that, then you can start to hedge your position rather than save money. And that's the new rule of money. So another old rule of money was, you have to buy your house because your house is your greatest investment. And that's where I got into a lot of hot water in 1997 when I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I said to people, your house is not an asset, your house is a liability, because most people think their houses are assets, and that's not true. So the old rule of money was to buy a house, and the new rule of money is you have to know the difference between an asset versus a liability. And these are very simple accounting terms, and again, I don't spell very well. So if I could explain very quickly why most people's houses are not assets. I'm not saying don't buy a house and don't have a dream house. I'm just saying know the difference in assets and liabilities. Because when you look at a financial statement, and this is my rough draft of one, this is the basis of financial intelligence, the basis of your financial IQ. This is why your banker asks you for your financial statement. Your banker does not ask you for your report card. The banker does not care if you had great grades or what school you went to. The banker wants to see your financial statement, income, and balance sheet, because this shows them how smart you are financially. This is more sophisticated than just, your credit score. But anyway, financial statements has income, expense, asset, and liability. So when most people buy a house, when most people buy a house, What you have here is a mortgage. And it looks like you have a house here, which is an asset. But that's not really accurate. What determines if something's an asset or liability is the most important word in financial intelligence, and the word is cash flow. And we ask any accountant how important this is. So as a young boy, my rich dad very simply said, assets put money in your pocket. Cash flows into your pocket. And a liability takes money from your pocket. So if you're truthful about it, you say, well, does my house take money from my pocket? And I would say for most people, every month their house takes money from their pocket. And then the savers say, but my house is paid off. I don't have a mortgage on it. But you still have expense, insurance, and upkeep. So the house is taking money from your pocket. So my point here is this. If I have a house and money is flowing out of my pocket, that house is a liability. So my personal residence, my home, is a liability. Now, I love my house. I want you all to have your dream houses and all this. But I don't call my personal residence an asset. It's a liability. It's about $15,000 every single month. Whether I make money or not, that's still, the bank still wants to get paid, taxes still want to get paid, and all this. Now, if I have an apartment house or a single family house and every month my tenant pays me money, then that same house is an asset. So now let's say the tenant walks out and stops paying me. That's when the house turns into a liability because I have no money coming in. So it's very simple. Rather than just say my house is an asset, you have to know today in the new rules of money what's an asset and what's a liability. Very simple rules are. Assets put money in your pocket, and liabilities take money from your pocket. So when I ask most people, if you stop working today, how much money keeps going out? Where that money is still going out, it's a liability. And if you stop working today and money keeps coming in, that's an asset. Money is coming into your pocket. Assets put money in your pocket, and liabilities take money from your pocket. The reason my wife and I could retire when we did at a relatively young age, we had more assets than liabilities. The reason people are in trouble today, they have more liabilities than assets. So if you're going to be rich today, don't just say my house is a good investment. You have to ask yourself, is my house an asset or a liability? My wife and I have two houses, one regular residential house, one vacation house, but we have several, I think we have about 1,000 to 1,500 apartment units that every month put money in our pocket. We also have stocks that put money in our pocket. We also have oil investments that put money in our pockets. So I work very hard at acquiring assets and minimizing liabilities. And that's the lesson on why the new information, the new rules are you must know assets versus liabilities. So the next old rule, new rule of money I want to talk about is one of the nastiest four-letter words in most people's vocabulary, and that four-letter word is debt. And every expert will tell you, get out of debt, get out of debt, get out of debt. Those are old rules. To be up to date and with time, especially since after 1971, you've got to know today that there's both good debt and bad debt. And the reason most people are in trouble is because they have too much bad debt. And as from the example of assets versus liability, it's a very simple thing. Good debt makes you rich because it puts money in your pocket, and bad debt is bad because it takes money from your pocket. So I have a house and I'm paying it off and all that stuff, but my house is bad debt because I got to pay for it. Good debt is debt that somebody else pays for me and makes me rich. So if you really understand money and have a higher financial IQ and invest your time in this, your greatest asset, you'll know that you can use debt to get rich, especially today. One of the reasons, that when you look at what happens to most people is, again, if this is an income statement, expense, asset, and liability, The reason most people are in financial trouble is they think they buy a nice house, so they buy this big house, but they have this thing called a mortgage. And nothing wrong with a mortgage, but the word mortgage, if you understand financial literacy or the definition of the word, mortgage means death, mortgage, the death of your future age. So you have to know when to use debt and in the good process. So what happens to most people is they go to school, like they were told, they get a job, their first big line item expense is taxes because they're an employee or self-employed, and the second line item expense is called a mortgage payment. So the money is just pouring out of their pockets this way because they have bad debt. Now, as an investor, because I took a real estate course years and years ago, and my rich dad taught me is I own a house here. I have a mortgage for it. But every month, I don't pay for that house. My tenant, bless her soul, pays me money, and that money then pays the mortgage and all this stuff off. So I am a wealthy man because I have lots of good debt. And I get richer and richer because I use debt. If you understand tax law, debt is tax-free. It's wonderful stuff. There's another thing about knowing how to use debt to get rich. The reason most people are in trouble today in the real estate market is because they were flipping properties. They were trying to buy it and sell it for income. That puts you in another category. I buy and I hold and I use the cash flow, and cash flow is passive income, which is taxed less. So there's so many different reasons why a high financial IQ, part of your learning is to understand good debt and bad debt. If you're the old thinking, you might think all debt is bad. That is not correct. Today, you have to know good debt and bad debt. There's one more thing I think that's really important. You know, I said earlier that savers were losers. I believe, and I could be wrong, that in the near future, the debtors will be the winners. And the reason for that is, for example, I just bought an apartment house, and let's say I paid $20 million for it, and I have a $20 million mortgage on it. Well, if they keep devaluing the dollar, I'm going to be paying that $20 million off with dollars that are worth less and less and less. So people who have good debt become winners because after 1971, I can pay it back with junk dollars. Now, if you can understand that, you might understand why, to be a smart person in the 21st century, you need to know good debt versus bad debt. That takes a little education, a little reorientation. So it is unfortunate because of 1971, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, savers became losers and debtors became winners, but debtors who have good debt. So the last thing I want to talk about debt is one of the best investments I made, because I started off with no money like most people. You know, my first investment was a little $18,000 condo in Hawaii, and I made a whopping $25 a month. I didn't make much money on that deal, but every time I did an investment, be it real estate or business, I got smarter, because experience makes you smarter. So I started with just a little $18,000 unit. I broke out my credit card. I paid the $2,000 down payment with my credit card, so it was 100% finance. Now, most experts will say you, that's stupid. You don't do that. But if you know what you're doing, you can do it. A number of years ago, I bought a $7 million commercial building. I paid for it with zero down. And every month, after everything is paid for, it puts about $30,000 a month income in my pocket, or $360,000 a year for no money down. So that is the price of having a good education or a bad education. A good education is knowing the good debt versus bad debt and how debtors can win if you know what you're doing. Even in this economic environment of high volatility, because I'm basing all of my investments not on capital gains or appreciation, I base all of my investments on cash flow, how much money comes in. So even though the real estate market has crashed, I hate to say this, but it's been good for me because more people became renters all of a sudden. So my rental rates went up, my income went up, I'm paying for it with cheap dollars and things like this. So in the new rules of money, you have to know the difference between good debt and bad debt, and why savers are losers and debtors are winners. Okay, and then old rule of money is invest for the long term, and most people say invest in mutual funds. I personally don't invest in mutual funds, and most people, it's not a bad idea. But if you want higher returns with less risk and less taxes, then you have to first invest in your financial intelligence. So mutual funds have its place for most people, but I personally don't invest in them, and I'll go into why. So when somebody says invest for the long term, one of the problems I have with that is, what does that mean? Because that's the old rule. The new rule is you have to know the difference between buy, sell, and fool. And so when I'm buying and selling something or investing, this is the difference for me, okay? When I buy, let's say, a house or an apartment house, I buy it long. That means I want to hold on to my real estate forever. But what I do is I sell it every 30 days to my renters. So I hold the property forever. All these guys who are flipping property, the problem with flipping property is that you have capital gains tax all the time. You're losing money to taxes. It doesn't make sense. So buying, let's say, an apartment house, I have, let's say, a 500-unit apartment house today, and I started off with little individual houses. You know, the rule for getting rich is from Monopoly: 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. So I started with small houses, and today we have big apartment houses, big commercial buildings, things like this. But the principle is the same, whether it's a small house or a big house. So I buy it. I intend to hold it forever. I'm going to pass it on for generations, but I sell it every 30 days. The same with oil. The other day I was filling up my gas tank and I got really upset. It cost me $72 to fill my tank of gas. And the reason I was upset, because I was a buyer of gas. But then I went home that afternoon and I found oil hit approximately $140 a barrel. So then I was happy again. You see, on one side I was a buyer, which I was unhappy, but as a seller of oil, I was happy. So this is my point here. If you're going to be rich in life, the reason most people are poor is because they're primarily buyers with very little to sell. You know that old advice I talk about financial education: go to school and get a job. So let's say you sell your time, you know, I'll sell it for $25 an hour. If that's all you've got to sell, you're not getting ahead, because the Federal Reserve keeps printing money faster and faster. You have to work harder and harder, then you get taxed harder. So if you're going to be rich, the thing my rich dad taught me was you have to have something to sell every single month. So every single month I'm selling my apartments, my units, for 30 days at a time. I'm selling my oil, you know, on the open market. And you look at what I did, even though I flunked out of high school twice because I couldn't write and I really couldn't spell, is when I write a book, I write it once, but I sell it into 100 different languages throughout the world. So every quarter I'm getting a paycheck. So to be rich, it really understands the new rules of money requires you to know when you're buying, when you're selling. And that is essential to being rich today. Now, when I talk about the fool, it's called the greater fool theory. So like being a real estate guy, I go out there and somebody says to me, oh, this house is $100,000. But next year, it'll be worth $200,000. Generally, that's what's, you know, what do you call those guys? Real estate brokers or mortgage brokers or stock brokers. My rich dad said the reason they're called brokers is because they're broker than you are. So they're telling you to buy this stock or this house because the price will go up. Again, that's capital gains, not cash flow. And then you become the greater fool. You know, the people, unfortunately, who are hurting financially today in the housing market, they were the greater fool. They bought the idea that the price of real estate would keep going up. Well, as you and I all know, prices go up and prices go down. So if you're going to, the new rules of money and the financial intelligence and your financial education requires you to know to be balanced, be both buyer and seller, and not be the greater fool. I say it again. When I fill up with gas, I get angry because I'm a buyer, but I'm happy because I'm also a seller. If you're going to be rich, you should be selling more than you're buying. One last thing is the one reason I really don't care much for mutual funds is because I don't know if you're the buyer or the seller or the fool, but I'll make that decision. If you're the investor, then you put up 100% of the money, and I think you take 100% of the risk. It doesn't make sense to me. Same as you put money in the bank. And the mutual fund company, they put up 0% of the money, but what they get is 80% of the returns. So this is why I really don't recommend, but it's good for most people. Put your money in a mutual fund and just let it sit there. But what happens is you take 100% of the risk, you only get 20% of the returns, and you put up 100% of the money. That doesn't make sense to me. That's why I like to use debt, good debt as leverage and things like this. But again, this is your greatest asset right here. So I don't just blindly invest for the long term. I don't park my money. And the reason I don't park my money in the bank is because I said in 1971, the US dollar stopped being money and it became a currency. The word currency means current. You must keep your money moving. The people who are losing financially today are people who are parking their money in long-term things like savings account and mutual funds. That's good for the average person, it's good for the average investor, and it's better than nothing. It's better than being poor. But you're not getting ahead with old information or old rules of money. I'll just pass this last thing along for those of you who say, well, I don't want to be an investor, it's too much work. I understand. It was years ago, a friend of mine, a friend asked a friend of mine, says, what would you say to the average investor? And my friend, who was a very rich man, said, what I say to the average investor is, don't be average. Because today, in this high volatile environment, the average people, the middle class, are getting wiped out. So those are the new rules of money. You don't invest for the long term. You have to know when to buy, when to sell, and when not to be a fool. And so the last old rule of money is always that interesting word. It's called diversify. If you listen to most guys, they go, diversify, diversify, diversify. Diversify, diversify, diversify. And then people say, well, diversify, diversify, diversify. But the richest investor in the world, a man named Warren Buffett, does not diversify. So my question is, if the richest investor in the world, Warren Buffett, doesn't diversify, why is everybody else recommending you diversify? And in my term, my rich dad said, diversify means de-worsify. And what they want you to do is buy a lot of stuff, because most brokers, and again, the reason they're brokers is because they're broke, is that they can't tell you which is going to be the good stock or the good real estate or the good bond and all this. So they tell you to diversify. That's like me going to a horse race and not knowing which horse is going to win, so I'm going to bet on every single horse. That's diversifying your bet. The only way a diversification process works is if the dark horse wins. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but it's not a very good way. But the common wisdom, the old intelligence idea is to diversify, and what I believe in is something else, is increase your financial IQ, your financial intelligence, and instead focus. And what focus stands for is this. Focus is follow one course till you're successful. And so that's what I did in 1973. I signed up for my first real estate investment course. And I just did it and did it and did it. I bought this one little $18,000 place. And I did it again, and I did it again, and I did it again until the point where I understood it. And then I went into becoming an entrepreneur. And I did it, and I did it, and did it. And I'm still learning. And I'm still learning about real estate. And the reason, in 1966, I got into oil when I went to work for the Standard Oil Company. So today, I'm still focusing. I invest in oil and oil and oil, and I don't diversify. It doesn't mean I don't lose. Sometimes I lose, sometimes I make mistakes and all this. But I just don't buy good as with all the bad. If you're going to be successful as an investor, diversification is good for the average investor. If that's what you want to be, have a good life. But what I'd rather do is be able to know the good ones from the bad ones, the good investments from the bad investments, the good advisors from the bad advisors, and what's good for me and what's not good for you. because what I do is not necessarily what's going to work for you, and vice versa here. So that's why I really think instead of diversification or diversifying, the new rules of money say follow one course until you're successful, and then keep doing it. Because once you find that way of being successful, you can do it again and again and again. It's just like learning to walk. You fall down a number of times. Once you learn to walk, you know it forever. And that's what I recommend. So some of the difference between the old rules and the new rules. Thank you very much.